This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 8th of July 2021, and I am 2J.
I'm 2M.
I am CS.
And in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, policewoman leaves trail of blood death. In the Standard, Raila roadmap to State House. And in the Star, Raila sets stage for 2022 top job duel with RUTO and other stories.
Oh, yes.
So, Tuam, how about you kick us off with some of your crazy Thursday thoughts?
This Thursday, we will send a random memo to Government House in Karen, addressed to Chief Hasura himself, William Ruto, and I'll tell him a story. There was a prisoner in Greek mythology called Daedalus, who was locked up with his son called Icarus. While in prison, Daedalus, the father, who was a great architect, came up with a brilliant idea for escaping prison. He built two sets of wings, one for himself and one for his son Icarus. The wings were made of feathers and wax. They were designed to help them fly out of prison. But before the two escaped, the father warned his son Icarus not to get too excited about flying. In particular, he warned him not to fly too high because the sun would melt the wax on his wings. However, because Icarus was young, he did not heed his father's warning. He flew too close to the sun and the wax on his wings melted. He fell and died. To a point here, the job of deputy president is made of wings that are fashioned with wax. If Ruto is flying too close to the sun, the wax will melt and he will fall. Meeting foreign heads of state in a private visit, secret visit, without express permission from the head of state is downright disrespectful.
Correct.
It is a blatant disregard of good manners. And just like Icarus was excited and had raw ambition to fly close to the sun, Ruto will fall politically.
Wow. Yeah, no, I found it quite interesting how he went off to another country to open some medical situation,
facility,
right?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, our president was here at home taking care of his own people.
At night.
Right?
Round
at
the
night.
clock.
Working round the clock.
Exactly.
Round the clock.
The DP can stay where he is.
Yeah, but you can be sure those visits are definitely about something else. It's not about opening medical facilities. It's probably something to do with
Let's leave it there, maybe.
All right.
So today I want to pose a question that has bothered us here at the Fort Hall School of Government. And that is, are Kikuyus lying to Kalenjins and the country about their intentions for 2022? Is the Mount Kenya community waiting until the very last moment to reveal their true intentions? Now, this is just a hypothesis, but we want to share it with you. Law number 12 of the 48 Laws of Power states, use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim.
Oh, goodness.
The Chinese call this practice giving before you take. The gift distracts your victim while you do the taking. And it can be used to create an immediate distraction from what you're doing or soften someone up for future actions and requests.
Yes.
So in the book, Green gives a story of Al Capone and a con man to illustrate his point. Al Capone, of course, was one of the most notorious mobsters in American history. Also known as Scarface.
Yes.
Yes, he inspired the movie.
Yes.
Capone rose to infamy in Chicago during the alcohol prohibition era. This man was bad.
Oh, yes.
And he was used to dealing with bad, dishonest people just like him.
Yeah.
But one day, a con man called Victor Lustig asked Capone for a favor. He asked to borrow $50,000 and promised to double it in 60 days. So Capone agreed, and Lustig went on his way. But here's the thing. Lustig put this $50K in a safe, locked it up, and left it untouched. He returned to Capone 60 days later and returned the $50K. But he apologized and explained that his deal fell through, and so he wasn't able to double the money. Now, Capone was used to dishonest thieves, but this was different. He was caught off guard, and this disarmed him.
Yes.
Capone was so impressed with Lustig's honesty that he just let him keep the $50K.
Yes.
But this is exactly what Lustig wanted in the first place.
Fantastic.
So what is our point with this story?
Yeah.
Like Lustig,
Yes.
could the Kikuyus be using selective honesty to fool the whole country?
Ooh.
As 30% of the voting electorate in the whole country,
Yes.
the Kikuyus are dominant.
Yes.
So I ask, why would the largest majority of voters in the country abandon their culture and historical trends for a man that they have only known for 8 years?
Beautiful.
The only logical response, in my view, is that this is a con.
Yes.
And at the very last minute, Mount Kenya will show its true colors and surprise the country.
Kaboom.
But then again, this is only a hypothesis.
Why didn't you carry a bazooka today?
Utabiri wa hali ya hewa.
Hey.
Looking at the headlines, unfortunately, we are increasingly inclined to take a dim view of the editorial policy in respect of headlines. On most days, we are treated to the mundane, the bad, and the sensational. There are monumental things happening in this country that will have an impact on this country's trajectory, but these things barely seem to register in the radar of the country's major newsrooms.
Yeah.
Since every week we commit to discussing the headlines you might have missed, a broader view of that may also include those headlines you missed because they should have been headlines but weren't.
Yes.
For example, a headline we expected to see and read about was Uhuru's post-COVID diplomacy. The president in the past few weeks embarked on 3 major foreign trips that have implications on several key policy issues, including big push infrastructure investments, human rights and gender equity, security, and vaccine nationalism. Not a blip. When he was in France, for example, the president was able to unlock 160 billion for the commencement of the 233-kilometer Rironi-Nakuru-Mau Summit Road, as well as the Nairobi Light Commuter Rail, which will link CBD with JKIA. The road will expand the 2-lane Nairobi-Mau Summit Highway into a 4-lane dual carriageway and will include a 4-kilometer elevated highway through Nakuru town and soon to be city, and construction and improvement of interchanges along the highway. But impressive as that is, it is not enough to stop at highlighting that. Earlier in the year, the president reminded us that when Cecil Rhodes dreamt of a road from Cape to Cairo, their vision was not the road. The road was not the dream, but what the road would do. The president made us alive to the fact that our brick and mortar investments of roads, rail, and ports are not the dream. The dream is what the big push investments will do for Kenya and how they will transform our standing in the community of nations and form the basis of national prosperity and creation of decent and steady jobs for our people. The road will open up the northern corridor and will have major implications on trade of both goods and services. The northern corridor originates in Mombasa and terminates in Malaba, and is the most important transport corridor in Kenya. This is also recalling that this corridor serves the port in Mombasa, the Nairobi Inland Container Depot, and the Naivasha Inland Container Depot. Can imagine what that means for trade. Ultimately, all our big push investments have been conceived to catalyze the economy. There's a lot more that can be said, but the main point here is the fourth estate needs to contextualize these key developments for Kenyans to help explain to viewers and readers, for example, what the nexus is between the president visiting France and what that will mean for the economy of Nakuru City and all the other small towns in between. We submit that if the papers keep dishing mundane, bad, and sensationalist headlines, we will not hesitate to tell you what the headline should have been. And that's a promise.
Oh yes, we do promise to keep that promise. So on that note, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines by. We ask ourselves, is the headline topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, and thoughtful or just plain lazy? Honestly, CS, everything that you have said has made me feel that we just need to toss all 3 headlines.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Oh, okay, we're not even debating that, they are out. On that note, we have absolutely no winning headline.
And now our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Foragers, Farmers and Fossil Fuels, How Human Values Evolve by Ian Morris.
Yes. So most people in the world today think that democracy and gender equality are good and that violence and wealth inequality are bad. But most people who lived during the 1,000 years before the 19th century thought exactly the opposite. So bear with us while we explain this. So in broad lines, this book looks at culture as society's way to adapt to the sources of energy. The better adapted they become, the bigger the slice of available energy they can extract, and the better equipped that they will be to displace other cultures. So historian Ian Morris argues that exactly how societies get fuel for energy from the environment determines their values, because human culture and values evolve over time. When a society's ability to capture energy changes, its values also change. And so the author says that humans have found three main ways to get the energy they need: from foraging, from farming, and from fossil fuels. And that these three stages reveal models of cultural evolution that show how each age got what they needed. So, foraging cultures came first. Foragers support themselves by gathering wild plants and hunting animals. And they extract only their minimal daily requirement of energy.
Yes.
Foragers value equality over most forms of hierarchy, but they also accept violence and violent resolution of conflicts as part of life. Then the farmers followed.
Yeah.
Farmers support themselves by domesticating plants and animals, and they can extract much more through cooperation. They also value hierarchy over equality, and because they begin to turn towards a process of law, they largely reject violence. And the third and final stage features fossil fuel values who turn towards individual action.
Yeah.
So this culture takes energy from fossilized plants in the form of coal, gas, and oil. Here, hierarchy is less appealing, and fairness is fostered by the abundance of energy that is now available. So they tend to move towards law.
Yes.
So my question as I read this book, does this explain why the British colonizers viewed Africa as such an easy victim?
That's a good question.
They arrived in between the farmer and the fossil fueler.
Yeah.
So not only were they in need of energy to fuel their economy, but violence hadn't been ruled out.
Yes.
So is that why they came guns a-blazing?
Yeah.
But then also with the Bible,
No,
right?
no, it's a great question, and I think you've answered yourself well. But you said one thing that reminded me of Hasra Nation. Those foragers just behave like Hasra Nation anyway. I love the chapter on fossil fuels, and his central thesis here is that fossil fuels are responsible for the shift from the agrarian to the industrial age. In fact, fossil fuels changed the structure of markets, setting off feedback loops that swept away the old barriers to scale and integration.
Yeah.
It was a virtuous cycle, an entire ecosystem. Steam-powered transport drove the cost of traded goods down and down, making it possible for even more people to buy them, and high wages tempted more and more people to take factory jobs rather than staying home on the farm, producing an ever more complex division of labor and churning out even more goods. But it wasn't just the trade ecosystem that was spurred by fossil fuels. Fossil fuels had the impact on the consciousness of labor.
Yeah.
You see, forced labor had been indispensable to farming societies for thousands of years, but fossil fuels swept it away in less than a century. And no sooner had free wage labor triumphed than fossil fuels also began dissolving another ancient and indispensable blockage in farming societies, labor markets, the gendered division of labor. Now, the fossil fuel 20th century was 10 times safer than the world of foragers, and 2 or 3 times safer than that of farmers. The more that fossil fuel societies have moved forward toward peace, democracy, open markets, gender equality, and equal treatment before the law, the more they have prospered. Consequently, over the astonishingly short period of 2 centuries, large parts of the world have moved far from agraria towards industrial.
I like that.
Yeah, but I also want to say this, that it is because of fossil fuels that human beings have discovered the value of renewable energy. And that's because the consumption and depletion of fossil fuels has forced us to adapt to newer forms of sustainable energy, which in essence not only makes life cleaner, but cuts the cost of production.
Yeah. Honestly, it just got me thinking. Farmers use wheelbarrows, you know?
Yeah.
And fossil fuelers
Yeah.
develop trains and industries.
Yes, actually, foragers use wheelbarrows. Farmers use tractors
Tinga.
and tinga. Aren't they the same thing anyway?
Moving on.
But farmers have respect for hierarchy.
That is true.
Hasura Nation is a
CS, how
bucket
about you?
full of crabs.
Give us your thoughts.
And even in terms of industria, I recall that the president was recently lauded in Canada for his efforts in green energy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think this man is years ahead. Foragers, Farmers and Fossil Fuels is a book that is both rich in terms of nuance and insight. It is fascinating how a link can be made between our diet, biology, chemistry, our fuels, and our values as human beings at different points throughout the history of time. And because of this, it is also an ambitious text because it seeks to explain a vast expanse of anthropology within a couple of 100 pages. It is therefore inevitably reductive, which is something that the author has also acknowledged in the book. But he also makes the argument that reduction is not always bad or simplistic. He even goes a step further in suggesting that, in his defense, all scholarship is reductionist. To make his point, he gives an example of nothing known as Martin Gilbert and his massive 8-volume biography of Winston Churchill that was published as 13 separate books.
Can you imagine?
He says that even at this size, the author still had to reduce Churchill's life towards a finite number of volumes. Reductionism is therefore not a bad thing by itself. Everyone, scientist or commoner, reduces large amounts of data to more manageable sizes in order to act and interpret what is going on about them.
Absolutely.
The structure of the book is also quite interesting in that the author presents his thesis and the data to prove this. And once finished, several others who had attended his lectures, which provided the basis and foundation for the book, those who attended the lectures were given space to rebut his argument. Once they have had their say, the author then inserts what amounts to a defense against their arguments. In this way, the book is also a dialogue between opposing points of view.
Yeah, true.
It therefore achieves an enviable aim of being a synthesis of ideas and arguments in one book.
Yeah, and I actually thought that was quite an interesting route that he took. He had, well-known historians, authors, and whatnot come and, as you said, rebut some of the points that he made. And as you said, I think it makes it for quite a lively and entertaining read.
Absolutely.
Right? So on a day when we had no winning headline, and in fact, I think I want to assign a winning headline to the Fifth Estate, and we're going to go with what CS said. What was that headline?
Uhuru's post-COVID diplomacy.
Exactly. The Fifth Estate Gazette. You heard it here first, right?
Yeah.
So on a day...
Issued on this day, the 8th of July, 2021.
Issue 001. So on a day where we had a winning headline from the Fifth Estate Gazette, I would like to leave you with a quote that kind of goes back to what we discussed in the headlines. And it comes from Dale Carnegie. He said, "Don't be afraid of enemies who attack you. Be afraid of the friends who flatter you." So that's food for thought.
Whoa.
So don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find us on your TV screens. We're on GoTV, Pan Free to Air, and Star Times. Have a lovely evening.
God bless.